Welcome back to the Get Mental podcast. I am here with Joseph Kennedy today. Quick rundown on my guy, Joe. Joe went to his bachelor degree at Slippery Rock. Did you participate in basketball? I think you played or got recruited.
I started and then got hurt, didn't keep playing. Kind of what got me into sports psych.
Which I want to cover and talk about. So me and Joe went to Miami of Ohio together, both graduated in sports psychology. And now he is at Springfield College and campus and university doing the whole thing, man. PsyD, whole 9 yards. Just a really quick background on my guy, Joe Kennedy. He worked at IMG Academy and also for the Ready and Resilience program that we worked in together with the U.S. military. Joe Kennedy is now currently a doctoral candidate working towards his PsyD in counseling psychology. And has experience growing mental health services at college and different athletes. We were talking about the rundown of the applied sports psychology course that you're actually teaching there at Springfield College. And dude, it's awesome to have you on the pod and great to see you grow.
Yeah, thank you, man. It's about time I finally said yes to doing this with you. So I'm excited about it.
You know, you would have thought that you were like Michael Jordan that I was going to have on my podcast, the way in which you kind of dodged my invite, let alone being best friends. I don't know, you're camera shy or what?
Just Joe Kennedy. No Michael Jordan either.
I had to go through your agent, which is your wife, just to get you on the podcast. And you know what? We got here. So we're fine. Anyway, Joe's awesome. Great guest. I mean, just extremely talented and thought-provoking, especially within sport and performance psychology. So I guess one of the first questions that I have for you is, what are some of the things, hot topics, trends, things that are exciting to you about the field of sports psychology right now?
Yeah, I think you're starting to see more and more positions pop up because of like the reduced stigma. And I think that's both mental health and mental performance, where you're seeing more and more athletes that are open to seeking support, mental health, mental performance, whatever it is. And then you're seeing more and more organizations, colleges, pro teams starting to hire people. So to me, like, that's like the coolest trend is you're seeing it actually grow. You're seeing people talk about it more, things like that. I think another cool trend for me is like you're seeing the implementation of mindfulness work, but like really backed by like theory and research, not, hey, we saw Kobe was meditating, so like we should meditate. And that's cool that like that type of stuff gets people to look, but you're seeing like more of this like integrated approach of like theory and practice. And then I know we touched on it before, but like I coming from like my clinical background, learning a lot about different theories. Like I'm more like acceptance commitment based and like really starting to see people like lean into different theories as opposed to just skills. It's how they conceptualize like where distress or lack of confidence, like things like that come from. And then like, how do we actually work with people? Like having a stronger theory background versus like, oh, you're lacking confidence, like just think differently. And I think that's what separates our training from like just any other person. Is like being able to be rooted in those type of things. So yeah, for me, like that, those are the things that excite me.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I mean, just seeing the field grow ever since we were in grad school together. I mean, a lot of adoption has happened due to a lot of things, right? Which not so great things. Simone Biles is one of those cases. Kevin Love is another one. A lot of high profile athletes are now turning to the mental health, mental wellness, mental fitness. And those things are somewhat different. We can get into the weeds surrounding those. But I think that just globally, as a society, we're really like leaning in, and colleges, universities, but also professional athletes, professional teams are starting to hire. There's a lot of jobs out there for us. And those things I'm super excited about. And you're furthering the field, especially when it comes to that. The mindfulness approach, obviously, I love that stuff. And I absolutely love that it works. And so there is a lot more theory, a lot more science out there. I haven't really looked too much into the research lately, but I guess within mindfulness, have you seen it work with athletes? What are some of the things that you're seeing from your end?
Yeah, I think like for again, like I like rooted in acceptance commitment type approach, and like I can explain like what that looks like, but like there's a lot of mindfulness type work in there because like generally, whether you see it on like a podcast, you see it on uh, a YouTube video, it's like, oh, like you have to think this way and like challenge your thoughts and like reframe your thoughts. There's nothing wrong with that. Like CBT, cognitive reframing, like it works. For me, I saw it as like my athletes are thinking while they're playing, and like that doesn't work. Like I don't want you in your head you missed a shot and you're jogging back on defense, like as we're someone who worked with basketball, and you're jogging back on defense trying to convince yourself that like you're confident and convince yourself that you're not nervous. And it's like, what are you not doing? You're not paying attention to the person you're guarding. You're not playing help side. You're not communicating because you're in here instead of being like task focused. So for me, like that's where I see a lot of like mindfulness weave in, where like in what I try to train athletes to do is like, can you like notice your thoughts as just thoughts? You don't have to change them. Don't have to fight with them. Don't have to wrestle with them. Like, in fact, that's where like you get like ACT calls it like getting hooked like a fish. And like the worst thing you can do is fight, as opposed to like, I always think like, you remember those Chinese finger traps?
Oh yeah.
And the whole goal was like, you had to, like, if you pulled, it tightened. If you pushed in, it released. Like thinking of thoughts like that, where like the more we fight with it, the tighter they get, the more anxious we get, versus like, can you just lean in? And like that's where mindfulness comes in, of can you just notice the thoughts you're having? You don't have to fight with them, you don't have to change them, you don't have to do anything with them, but can you notice them and then choose what you're going to do? Whether that's, I'm going to get more aggressive the next time I have the ball, or I'm going to lock in on the tee box with these swing thoughts, like whatever it is, but choose your next behavior based on like your values and a goal versus rooted in like my concerns, my fears, etc. So I see a lot of mindfulness there, and a lot of mindfulness in just the ability to like ground ourselves, whether that's on the court, or if you think like I work a lot with college athletes, like multiple practices, and then you got your schoolwork, and then you're 18 to 22, which is a huge, like you have social relationships and all of these things, like all these pressures. Like how can you ground yourself in the moment, whether that's like you're sitting in your dorm trying to study, you're out with your friends or family trying to enjoy yourself, or you're on the court trying to play. But learning how to ground yourself into the moment, that's where I see it really impacting people's lives.
Man, you said a lot of really good things there. One of them being a common misconception, I think, within sports psychology is that we try to have you think about your thinking, but also like, is that good for you or not? And what you're saying is that it's not, and it makes complete sense intuitively. But I think a lot of times, especially practitioners within sports psychology, but also just athletes generally, are thinking, okay, what's my self-talk like? Am I supposed to be where I'm at? And the ball went to this. I got to get help side. And then it's like, well, am I? And it's just so much going on in your head where you're trying to say that what we're trying to actually do is be a little bit more present. Therefore, you play a little bit more freely, etc. And I really like the analogy of the finger traps, right? And ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy. Maybe you could talk to me a little bit more about like how this is versus isn't therapy, but also understanding that like within ACT and within that, it's really just like, hey, if you lean in a little bit more, then you can release your thoughts and just see them come through. And as you're like on the field actually playing, it's not advantageous for me to like think about my thinking all the time.
I think that last piece you just said is like the where maybe we as a field need to be better. I'm not saying people are bad at this. Maybe it's just my own, what I'm seeing in front of me. Yeah. But like for athletes, thinking about their thinking is wildly important. Just not in the game. Like that's not the time to do it. But like if I'm in practice, like that's a good time for me to notice like, oh, like when I miss 3 or 4 shots, I get in my head. And I start overthinking. And then like, because I'm overthinking, I'm not aggressive anymore. And I start passing up opportunities. Like that's the self-awareness piece. Like, yes, you need that because we can't change anything without knowing where we're at. I think the problem is where we become really in our minds. And this is just my, like what I believe about change. Like when we become really in our heads, like you miss 3 or 4 shots in a game and now you're in your head. and now you're aware you're in your head, so you're trying to convince yourself that you're not doubting yourself, where it's like, nah, you are. Like, and it's okay, like it happened, that's life, right? But like, can we notice it and then like kind of like lead in and choose what we're going to do next? I think it was Ken Ravizza that used to ask people, like, are you that bad of an athlete that you have to be confident to play well? And I think of thoughts in the same way of like, I can doubt myself and still shoot a basketball. So like, can I hold both? Like, can I have doubts and still be like, I'm gonna put up this next one, and like it's good. Like I'm gonna keep shooting even though I'm over 8. Like, so like I kind of see it that way. And it's a lot easier for me to sit in an office and say, I'm not the one out there. Like I'm not the one on the court. I'm not the one that's over 8 from the field. But like that's just kind of how I think about it.
That's an awesome quote, and I absolutely love that. Right, because to your point, I think maybe confidence is overrated. I don't know. Maybe it is. But exactly what you're saying, which is like, yeah, it's easy for me to sit here and say that I'm not the one taking the shots. Yes, there are a lot of factors that like play into individuals' confidence, but at the same time, shoot the damn ball, right? Like I think that you could do it, right? Just shoot it. But there's a lot of things that are in our way too, and I think there's a statistic out there that says, and I don't know whether this is true. You could debunk me. Maybe we'll place it into the show notes, the actual theory. But I think it's 98% of our thoughts are unconscious. And just as a thought experiment, again, I'm not saying that this is actual science, but just as a thought experiment, if only 2% of your thoughts are conscious, meaning I have awareness of them, and 98% are unconscious, then yeah, we have a lot of work to do, myself included, yourself included, all of us, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think as athletes, yeah, maybe taking a step towards being more mindful, but not actually like on the court during a game, big shot, whatever it is, but maybe just take a breath as LeBron James does often on the sidelines and just kind of recalibrate, recenter, and then go out there and just do it. I think is a really good way to go about it.
Yeah. I think about it a lot. Like, we spend a lot of time on like confidence, self-talk. And when I was at IMG, Greg Young, who I believe is in the MLS now in Kansas City, the director of mental performance, I could be wrong, but just brilliant human being. And he talked to me about one day about like how if he's working with an athlete that's struggling with confidence, he a lot of times leans into like more like attention work. Is like, because like if I'm lacking confidence, a lot of times it's because I'm focused on the wrong things. Like I'm internally, like I have all these doubts and I'm focused on those thoughts versus like, can I externally be task focused? So like, as you were just saying that, I was thinking like, yeah, like LeBron pressure shot, like he has thoughts, but like his focus is probably on the task. Like what play are we running? Where am I going to get my shot? Right? What am I going to do if the defense plays me this way? He's completely external and task focused. And like that, it's a lot easier to be confident when I'm thinking about like the actions I'm going to take and what I need to do versus I'm in my head going like, oh, but like, what if they guard me this way? I'm not going to get a shot off. What's Stephen A. Smith going to say if I miss this 3-pointer? Like, what's Skip Bayless going to say about me on his podcast? Like those thoughts, yeah, it's going to be hard for me to be confident. And sometimes I think about it that way, of like, instead of going like, oh, I'm going to structure all these affirmations for LeBron to say as he's walking on the court. It says like, can I shift your focus to be like external and task focused? Because I don't have to worry about the thoughts because they're unconscious. You're not worried about them. So like, I think about it that way sometimes as well too. Like playing with addressing confidence by shifting attention more effectively to things that matter.
Oh, I think that's a really big unlock, especially for myself, but also other athletes to just think about is where am I focused, right? Where is I think locus of control is a really good thing to think about too. Yeah. Like, am I focused on things that are inside of my control, outside of my control? And a lot of confidence does come from that, right? Like I'm thinking about the external environment, and that's like a lot of mindfulness, right? It's just to be present. Right, the thought is there. Acknowledge that the thought is there. Hey, I'm thinking about what Stephen A. Smith is going to say after this game. I'm acknowledging that thought is there without judgment. And I think that is the big thing that we kind of hold on to, especially as individuals in sports psychology, when we're talking to athletes, is one of the things that we're not trying to teach them is to judge themselves more critically. Yeah. Right. Saying 80% of your thoughts are negative on a daily basis. And you're like, well, I feel pretty defeated on that. Like maybe I should And as athletes and high performing individuals, we are attuned to fix those things that are wrong with us. And in that process means that we are judging ourselves, right? So one of the things that I, at least, and I know that you do this as well, try not to do is to remain judgment free, right? To say that, yeah, maybe there's some affirmations, but if I'm focused on my attention, is my attentional awareness going to after the game, right? Is it not present? Is it task oriented? Is it an internal confidence thing that I'm doubting myself, right? And a lot of those things come into play, but to play more freely is to shift your attention. And I really like that.
Yeah, yeah. Your piece about judgment was spot on. Of like such a struggle for people of like adopting like this non-judgmental approach to like their thoughts and their behaviors. And I think with athletes, it's like it's not entirely possible because on some level, like I do like I was thinking like maybe like being evaluative is better than being like than judging. Like I'm evaluating, you know, the highs, lows. I think in the military we thought it like sustains and improves. Like I'm evaluating where I'm at with the intention of like moving forward as opposed to like judgment. Because even as you were saying, I was like, yeah, like we hear this, oh, like 80% of my thoughts are negative. Like then instinctively it's like, oh, like can I lower that to 60? And now I have this goal that if I don't reach it because it's this outcome measure that like I can't control, like now that's a stressor because I'm not at 60 and that's bad. Like yeah, it's athletics is this interesting place of like it chock full of judgment. Like it's some of it like completely valid while also we're trying to get people to like let go of it to some degree, even though you work in an environment like when I worked with UMass men's basketball, it was like I'm trying to get people to judge themselves less in an environment that they're constantly being judged because that's how you're going to see playing time, whether you're performing well or not. So it's an interesting dynamic to be in.
Yeah, that's, and I would love to talk more about that. I could talk about that for hours, because I think it's a really interesting thing, right? We're trying to perform at our best in athletics, and like you said, like let's take basketball for an example. I want to be on the starting five, and right now I'm on the bench. Coaches are judging me. I'm judging myself because I can't perform at the level that is necessary to be worthy, quote unquote, of their attention on me. And therefore, I am devaluing myself, which is inherent judgment. Then I meet with a sports psych. And some of the training possibly is to lower the amount to which I am judging myself. And again, it is this balance because you're right, like this like non-judgmental awareness that like monks strive to be at, which is maybe enlightenment, where I'm fully in the present, but I'm also not judging myself and kind of not judging other people's or other individuals' actions as well, is somewhat counterintuitive in a performance environment. And maybe the ideal mindset is to balance it. I don't know where that balance is. Is it 50-50, like, oh, I should let that go versus, oh, I should not fixate on it, but acknowledge it, learn from it and move on. I'm getting trapped a little bit in my words, but I know that you understand what I'm saying. It's a really difficult thing to balance.
Yeah. And I think sometimes what turns people off to our work is when we try to push athletes into that when it's not realistic in their lived experience. Like it's so easy for me who's not playing to be like, oh, well, don't worry about what coach thinks and like just keep working hard and you'll get there. Like everything I just said is kind of nonsense. Like, of course you're gonna worry about what your coach thinks. Like in the same way I worry about what my boss thinks to some degree. Like, I shouldn't have said to some degree. But like, and like it's not true that if you keep working hard, you'll eventually get to your goal. Like that's not true. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It's just like it's not true. And I think what to me, like I try to be like wildly transparent in my work of like I don't know if we'll ever get you to the starting line. I don't make that decision. Like I don't know if we'll ever get you there, but what I'm not going to do is tell you don't worry about it and don't worry about what people think. But to your point, can we shift it to where it's I think the military thing at the bottom of the ATC model used to say, like, is it helping or harming? And like, I ask that question a lot. Like, is it helping or harming? And if it's harming, I always follow that with like, do you want it to be different? Because if you do, let's work on that. But if you don't, who am I to mess with it? Like,
Yeah, I love that. I think that, sorry, just real quick. What is the ATC model? Because I think it's a really good thing. I know what it is. We used to teach it in the military, um, kind of based off of cognitive behavioral therapy and somewhat, but I want you to
yeah,
explain it. And then also, have you used it with individuals, groups, and what's the athlete feedback, surrounding ATC?
yeah. So the ATC model, it's rooted in Albert Ellis's like ABC model, which is like cognitive behavioral therapy. That we have like activating events. Something happens. I love leaning into like just the facts, like who, what, when, where. Like we don't include why because that's our perception of it, right? So who, what, when, where. I missed the game winning three. That's what happened, right? Then the T is like what thoughts do we have that come from that activating event? So like our this event drives or leads to these different types of thoughts. And as we were saying earlier, like we have so many thoughts, so many unconscious. Your brain rattles off thoughts. Like if someone's listening to this right now, you probably had 6 to 10 in a couple seconds that you weren't even aware that you were having, right? So then like that's the T. And then those thoughts drive different emotions and different reactions. Reactions being like what we do. So like, how do I feel? What do I do? Um, so like, and to me, like it's a really clean way, even though I don't lean into trying to change the thought as much, it's a really clean way to get athletes or coaches or regular people to start to really see this, the way like our mind kind of works. So like something happens, I have a thought. Because of that thought, I experience different emotions and reactions. And can I start to be more mindful of the thoughts? And like, to me, it's a good pattern thing. So I don't use it necessarily to change, but I use it for patterns of like, am I noticing, oh, like I have a lot of thoughts that drive this emotion of like anxiety. And when I get anxious, I get out. Like I go to the back of the line because I want to avoid matching up with that good player, or I move to the end of the bench so I'm not asked to be checked into the game, or I avoid certain things because I don't want to be like I'm avoiding anxiety. Like to me, it's a good pattern tool, and then you can start to play around with like that last question we just said of like, is it helping or harming? Like, oh, it's harming. Do you want it to be different? Yeah. Okay. Now we have somewhere to go. Because I've also worked with athletes that have thoughts where I'm like, ugh, like that seems bad to me. But then they're like, oh, it helps me. Do you want it to be different? No. Okay. We're not touching it. Like it works for you. So to me, it's a good awareness tool. And like, I don't teach it as a very like broken out thing in group settings, but I'll use it individually to kind of like play around with like, what are you thinking? Because often you'll hear people go like, I missed the shot and I'm sad. And they just skip that thought. It's like, that's the key. Like, that's what we need to be more aware of. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I really like that you said that it's an awareness tool. Like I may have emotions in the moment and I may have thoughts that I'm unaware of. And so it's really just understanding the pattern and illuminating my thinking, right? Just trying to understand consciously what's going on in my head and not really. I love the way you put it because it's not like I'm trying to change my thoughts yet. And maybe we can get into this, like why this actually doesn't work. Like there's a lot of people in pop psychology or motivational speakers that are like, well, you have to use self-talk and affirmations. And I'm not saying that those don't work. I'm saying that it's just a lot more complicated than that. And it's a way easier said than done. Because yeah, when I have an emotion of, yeah, I missed the shot to your point and I'm sad, fill in the blank, right? Because there are a lot of other thoughts that are happening at that moment where it's not just the shot sad. And
yeah.
people usually just, and maybe this is just our society, but they're like, well, yeah, you should quote unquote feel that way. And has everybody missed a game winning shot and been totally elated or alleviated? Like, I don't know, maybe. And then it's like, yeah, is this helpful or harmful for me? Just as a tool for self awareness, I think is really strong.
Yeah. Yeah. I could not agree more.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things that I love teaching athletes too, just so they could just understand their self talk and their thought processes. If I were to ask you maybe some previous things you worked, or especially at IMG or maybe the military as well. What were some things that, or athletes that you met with at IMG? And I guess like what separates the best from the rest in your mind?
I'm going to generalize here. So I'm just prefacing like this is just my perception of what I saw. Not like I don't want somebody to watch this and leave and be like, well, this guy said I should do this because he worked with future NBA players. I think to me, like one, just inherent difference in skill. Like just I'll like bottom line, I love Kobe Bryant. I love like his work ethic. I borrow from it. I listen to the interviews. Also, we can be honest, wildly skilled compared to the average person, right? So like that, like one, just the difference is skill and ability. But when I think about even like that grouping of all the like the guys that I worked with, that some of them are currently in the NBA, those top level teams I worked with at IMG, I think like hit like one like just being like consistency, and like there's so much power. Like consistency doesn't have to be a I got up at 4 a.m. and had 4 workouts today and did 3 lifts. Like it doesn't, it's just like every single day I show up, I'm consistent in my approach to my work, the way I think about my work. Like there's a regularness and consistency into the way they operate. Like I think about certain guys that I now see, like I watch them on TV and like I remember them as being like, yeah, he was consistent in his routines. He was consistent in how he prepared for practice. He was consistent in how he prepared for games. Like that was a hallmark trait of this person. And I think of the other guys who were on the same team, same level, like future D1 projected to be NBA players, like the ones that weren't consistent, you saw that. And you saw like the lack of effort, lack of energy, like the inconsistent performance. And so I would say like one of the biggest things is like, you can label it broadly under discipline, but I just think like consistency, it was just the hallmark of those players. And sometimes they did more in a week, sometimes they did less in a week, but they were very consistent in the way they approached their work. I would say that was probably the biggest separator I saw.
Yeah. Yeah. And that just stringing together a couple of days goes so far. And can you string a couple more days? And then because more days turn into months, right? As you keep going around. And I think that that's like discipline and consistency. You're right. They go hand in hand so easily. But at the same time, it is like one of those things where athletes especially are and look, there are outside circumstances as well, like homework, school, there are a lot of other factors, family life that comes into play. But if you could string together a couple of good days, you could go to the next level.
And I think what goes with that, and this is like borrowing from like maybe like exercise psych or habit development, but I do think it applies to athletes too, is like being consistent doesn't mean like I have to do I have to start with the Kobe Bryant workout plan. Because like you're not like that's not gonna work. You're not gonna be able to be consistent in that. Versus like when I think about again those top guys, like there was a simplicity to the way they approached things. Like it wasn't this like insane workout every single day. Like there was this simplicity. If I talked to them about their routines, they were very simple routines that they could consistently do, as opposed to this super complex thing that they were trying to do every single day. And I think that leads to, can I stack days? Is there a simplicity in like the way that I move through the world? And I think about the other players where like things weren't simple. There was these complex, like, oh, I'm trying to have all these different thoughts and do all these different things and do all these different workouts. It's like, man, like simplifying things works. And I saw that on the court where like the good players thought about the game in more simple ways. It actually became one of my hallmark skills. I called it like shrinking the game, where I tried to get athletes to simplify what they were doing on the court because of like watching how those other athletes approach their work.
Talk to me a little bit more about that. Like, what does shrinking the game mean?
Yeah. So, I can tell you in a story. Like, this is a good example. So I was working with, when I was at IMG. At IMG, I worked with from middle school to like the post-grad national team. Post-grad nationals, like they should be in college, but they were taking a gap year and then they were going to college. So like there was post grad national and then like varsity national, which was like the best players in the country, and then like high school, 4 high school teams, 4 JV teams, and 2 middle school teams. So like I covered not all of them, but the majority of those teams when I was there. And I had an athlete, I think he was a junior varsity at the time, come off the court. Like he was the best player on the team, very solid, gonna play college somewhere, very solid player, point guard, and like just wasn't having a good start to the game. Couple turnovers, like you could see he was pressing, and he got like a cut. So he comes off to get the cut advantage, and I'm sitting on the AT tray at the table, and he literally just started talking to me, and he's like, man, he's like, I just like it's just like not working. Like I can't make shots. Like I can't do this. I can't do that. And I was like, okay, let's shrink this down. Like, what are things you do well that like you can go like not a make jump shots because you can't control that. Like not a get assists because I can pass to you wide open does not mean David's going to make the shot. So like not those things. But, like what do you do really well? Like what are the features of your game? And he's like, I knew the answer because I worked with him. But like it was like push the ball in transition, like very, very good on ball defender. And he was very good at like penetrating and kicking. So to me, it was like, okay, like you're stepping on the court and you're trying to score and get assists and get steals and get rebounds. And you're trying to do everything. And there's one person and one basketball and there's 9 other guys trying to do all this stuff. Right. So like, can we shrink the game down to the things you do well simply to get out of your own head and like just go play to get to the rhythm of the game? And like you played, like how often does it take a minute once you're in the rhythm of the game? Like now you're just playing and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I reeled off 2 or 3 in a row. And that was a great move. They got to the paint for a dish. Like the whole point of it was like to get him to stop thinking about all the things that he's doing, like not doing well and he's trying to do. And it was like, man, just do what you do well to start. Just get to the rhythm of the game. Like he went out and like literally like, and I'm not saying I made him play better that game. Like he did the work, but like literally saw a change of like became way more aggressive on defense. And in transition was pushing the ball, was getting into the paint and kicking. And then all of a sudden the first shot went in and then the second shot went in. And now he's in a rhythm. Now he's not thinking. Now he's playing his game. But it just took him. He was trying to play his best game the minute the ball tipped. And like, it doesn't work that way. Right. So for me, shrinking the game is like, can I focus in back to attention? Can I focus in on 1 or 2 or 3 things I do well consistently just to allow me to get into the rhythm of the sport that I'm playing? And then from there, just like now you're just playing. And I think when you get to that point, that's where I'm not a huge flow person, but that's where you get into these ideas of like flow and you get into being present is starting with like, can I just get to the rhythm of the game?
I absolutely love that. And it's such a great story to really illustrate just the power of people doing less and just being a little bit more simple. Because you're right, and especially at that level and the higher that we get, whether it's college, professional, or whatever it is, the game is more complicated, like inherently. And the skill level is so high that the individuals, especially basketball is just a really good example. We'll stick with that. So many different moves, plays, what the coach wants you to do, what the defender is doing, a lot of reaction, proactivity. Like there's just so much that's going on a basketball court at any given time that it gets extremely complicated. And people just make it look so easy. I mean, Ja Morant is one of these guys that just like flows around the court like effortlessly. And you're right. Like if you ever get stuck on, and again, this is like the self-judgment thing, right? Like I'm judging myself based on the speed that I'm trying to play at and nothing is working. The ball's not going in, and, the assists aren't, whatever, rebound, whatever it is, statistically, whatever, it's not working. I'm getting extremely frustrated in my head. And now I'm trying to problem solve. I'm trying to fix. And from there, it's actually less complicated than you think. And it's actually just be a little bit more simple, focus on some fundamental things that we can control and go from there.
Yeah. I think when you watch, like when you hear NBA players talk about it, like that's the vibe I hear of like, they like I love watching. I know he's not a fan favorite. Like I love watching Paul George play basketball. Like it's just smooth. It's efficient. Like, but like if you watch his game, he knows his spots. He knows what he does well. and he plays within that context. He simplifies the game. He knows how to get to his spot to hit that 18-foot pull up. So like that's how he plays, as opposed to like he's not doing the Steph Curry wheel around and shoot one off balance. Like in the same way you don't see Steph backing people down the post. Like they play, it looks complex, but like to me, like when I hear them talk about it, there's a simplicity and consistency to the way they approach a game to perform consistently at a high level, as opposed to like this, I'm gonna go out and do all these things and score 40, and like you don't hear guys talk about the game that way. But maybe that's just me. Like maybe I'm missing something. I just think about performance in that way. Is like, can you simplify it and focus on simple things until you're in the rhythm of the game?
Yeah, and it may look boring or less flashy at times, and it can look hyper explosive also. But I think that's like when you let the game come to you, right? If you're playing your game, being in your zone and in your level. Switching gears a little bit, because I know that you worked with some college athletes as well as just different colleges, et cetera, and you primarily focus on basketball, even though that's not necessarily your bread and butter. Like a lot of sports psychs are a little bit more diversified. But within that, what are some things that you are noticing at the college level as just college athletes? And I know that NIL is a big thing now. Different coaches create different motivational climates for their athletes, but you're also talking at the university level with undergrads and grad students as well. What are you noticing, I guess, that's different from maybe this Gen Z era or just youth athletes in general, from your lens, especially as it lends itself to mental health, mental wellness, mental fitness, and things of that nature?
I think like, because it's been a minute. Oh, actually, last year I worked with a lot of college athletes. I think one of the biggest things from like and I think people don't see it until they get there, is almost every college athlete, whether you're D3 or D1, like you were one of the best athletes, if not the best athlete in your school, in your area, like the whole 9 yards. Like that's how you got there, right? And like for me, like I worked the last 2-3 years, I worked with like Division I athletes at Providence, UMass, Amherst. So like all of these players were the best where they were currently or previously, right? It's hard, that transition into all of a sudden I'm not the best. All of a sudden, like there's a lot more pressure. There's a lot more eyes. Like there's a lot more riding on it when you think like NIL scholarships. Because I know like you're not supposed to be able to pull a scholarship, but coaches get out of them. Like, so like there's a lot more pressure on top of like this you were in a room that you were the standout, and then you stepped into another room and now you're just a guy because that other guy is the standout. And the gap because of COVID and people coming back and grad students getting like extra years. Like it's not, everybody's like, you're looking at an 18-year-old competing with a 25-year-old. Like it's a whole different ballgame. Even 18 to 22, like it's different. And I think we focus a lot on the guys or the girls or the women who are like this. That's what ESPN will show you. I forget his name. I think Ace Bailey, I think his name, the kid at Rutgers, the freshman who's dominating, right? We pay attention to those guys. Rare, right? What we don't see is like all the other freshmen in the country who are on teams struggling with that transition, because we see the guy that's killing it and we think that's normal, and it's not, right? So like to me, like that's the biggest thing, is just the transition, the pressures. And then you think for college students, like from a mental health standpoint, whole different environment. Your support system's gone. You are training in ways that it's not high school. It's not one practice a day. Like you have multiple practices, 6 a.m. You got film. You're juggling classes. Like we're asking people to be independent adults and be borderline professionals, like that. And like that to me is the hardest part. So a lot of times when I worked at Providence, you would see a lot of freshman athletes who would come in really just struggling with the transition, and this idea that like, I think I suck because like I used to be the star and now I'm not even the star. I'm on scout team. Like I'm not even near playing. And that's a tough pill to swallow, is to realize like I'm not the guy or the woman anymore. Like I'm just another person on the team, and everybody else is a lot better than me,
Yeah,
and a
no.
lot bigger, and a lot stronger, and a lot faster.
What are some things that like help with that transition? Because I think you're spot on. At least in my mind as a college athlete, that transition was really tough for me. And yeah, it got bad. Right, there's some things that had to give, and
Yeah,
some learnings that you like learned from yourself along the process about your identity, your values that are reinforced, your behaviors, actions, inactions, things that you say no to or
yeah,
yes to. I think that there's so much within that. I guess like what are some things, and I'm not looking for like hacks, and I know that generally speaking, creating an environment where you feel loved, safe, like I'm thinking of like the psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
hmm
We know that those are very important. I'm not saying that they're not. But I guess like I don't know, like in your mind and just like making it more human for me, like how do I how do I make that transition better?
yeah. I think a couple of things, like, and starting from the standpoint of like anything I say doesn't make that transition, the struggles go away. Like
Totally.
that's not like there's no version of that. Like unless you're that top ranked person who walks in and you're dominating, then maybe it's a little bit easier. But that's now you have different problems. Like that's
Yeah.
different problems. Um, but like I think about first and foremost like finding supports, whether that's the mental coach on your team, whether that's a sports psychologist in the athletic department, whether that's going to the counseling center, but like finding supports and being mindful of like where do I go when I'm struggling? Like where do I go when I need someone to talk to that's a safe space? Like I think that would be one of my first recommendations because often there's this I'm going to do it alone or I don't want to talk to somebody because I don't want coach to find out. Fair and valid concern. And that's why like counseling centers are a great space because they're confidential. So like having supports in place. And then I think a lot easier said, a lot harder to do, but this like I think we should normalize this process. And that's not just the athletes, that's parents, coaches, um, like systems in the athletic department, but normalizing like this process. And you see a lot of schools doing stuff. You see a lot of schools doing like freshman orientations and seminars to like, here's resources, here's things you can do. So it's like normalizing that stuff, and kind of talking about it, like talking about like, yeah, like you were the dude and now you're a dude and like that doesn't mean you'll never be the dude again. It's just
Yeah.
like you walked into a different room and not everybody walks into that room and crushes it off top. And I think I wish things like social media and uh Slam, Ball is Life, I don't know if they're still big anymore because I got away from them. um ESPN, like I think it's kind of like watching golf. And I know I'm pivoting around here, just stick with me. It's kind of like watching golf where like you watch the Masters and they're bouncing to different shots. And it's like this dude hit a hole in one and this dude hit 1 to 3 feet and this dude made a 30-foot putt. And you're like, man, like pros are insane. They do all of these things. And then like zoom out. They're showing you the highlights. That's how a golf broadcast works. They're only showing you the top plays. They didn't show you the 3-putt on 18. They didn't show you the dude hit it into the water, right? And then I think about the way like we conceptualize how freshmen walk in, and it's like the kid at Rutgers or LeBron who didn't go to college because he was that good. Like those are the people that get the attention, and then it
Yeah.
makes it harder for people to like acknowledge that like, nope, struggling is normal. That's the abnormal, right? So I think there's a normalization of like the transition being difficult, and then here's the resources I can turn to. I know I gave like a winding answer with no clear tips, but
No, well, I think that like one of the things that as you were speaking that illuminated to me was as a freshman going into college, there were a lot of orientations. There was a lot of me personally speaking for personal, and I don't know if this is the same for everybody. I didn't take it as seriously as people told me to. But I feel like if we really sat down as a team, now this could be your track team, basketball team, football team, insert the blank, whatever sport that you play, and your coach was like, hey, all the freshmen, I want y'all in the room, right? And not only are we going to do an orientation, but we are going to keep track of you, maybe have a buddy system, maybe bring in a guest speaker, maybe bring in the counselors, the sports psychologies, the mental health, all of these people. And I want you to string together a routine and go on that routine. For me, I'm a very routine oriented individual. If I'm making a transition in life, my routine is totally thrown off, which means it's a really good opportunity for me to make a new one and to
Mm-hmm.
deliberately think about what is going to serve me and what's not.
Yeah.
And in a new environment, I need to know where obviously the fitness center is. I need to know where all the stuff is. But also, one of the things that people didn't tell you, at least when I went to college, is that there's a sneaky amount of downtime,
Anyway,
like a lot, and there are people sleeping, playing video games, going out doing questionable things on the weekend, the whole 9 yards. And then when you're busy, you are really freaking busy. And I wasn't prepared for that. And I think that as a college athlete, yeah, maybe you have like buddy system with the senior person at the track team or whatever it is. Yeah, here's where to eat. Here's what to do in your downtime. But plan the stuff out deliberately. I guess like there were things like that open, kind of, but I wish that there were more of those things at a college
yeah.
level. And I know that different colleges operate differently, but I think that that sort of support makes the transition easier. Now, from a mental standpoint of I'm not the guy or girl or person that anymore, yeah, you're definitely gonna have to see sports psych about that. Speaking of
Yeah.
sports psych, though, like I would love for you to. Sorry, I don't know if you had any response to that.
I was just gonna add to what you just said of like I love that, and then like I think where I also see, and this isn't just freshman athletes, this is freshmen in general, like waiting until it's bad to then go get support versus
Yeah,
like to your point, like having structures in place. And like I would often like not see someone walk into like my office, whether it was an athlete or like a traditional student seeking counseling, where it's like, oh, like it's bad now. Like it's really bad. And like Veely and in our masters, I would say like you don't have to be sick to get better. And I think like reframing some of like whether it's sports psych or mental health, reframing that and like just routines, things of daily living, reframing it from like a like here's what I do because it serves me, as opposed to like a band-aid approach of like, oh, I'll go there when I need it. Yeah, it might be late then. Like you gonna really be struggling. So
actually, I had a question based off of that. Can you talk to me, my audience, more so? I kind of already know the answer to this question, but can you talk about in your mind, and I want to know your definition as well, like what's the difference between mental health and mental fitness? Because it seems that's kind of what we're talking about, where it's like preventative versus like repair, right? So
yeah,
there's like preventative care versus like care. And I guess the difference between like a mental, what different avenues of sports psychology could individuals like possibly see, I think is also a good topic to talk about. Again, in your lens, what's the difference? Because what you're talking about is proactive, what I call proactive resilience. Like resilience is
yeah,
I'm bouncing back in the face of adversity. Well, I would need adversity to bounce back from. So this is us not waiting until that adversity hits, but being more proactive about it. So I guess in your mind, again, what's the difference between mental health and mental fitness?
I love the question. I'm gonna give you a right down the middle answer, but I think that's because of like the way I've been trained over the last 4 years as like a psychologist in training is like to me like I don't see them as different.
Yeah.
Uh, I think there's a historical. You look at like clinical psychology, like there's clinical and counseling psych, and like really the way they think about things is different. Where like clinical psych is largely like generalizing and it's changing, but I'm generalizing here. Like here's you have this, you have clinical depression, here's treatment. You have clinical anxiety, you have OCD. Like here's a diagnosis and then a treatment. Where counseling, its roots are much more like holistic, strength based, goal oriented. So it's not rooted in this idea of like, oh, like we have a problem. And now it's not that we don't see people with problems, but there's also an element of it of like this is just an interpersonal process that we're just exploring who you are, like what your goals are, what strengths you have. So in that, like I think like if you I think a lot of people in the mental health field would be like, there's not a difference because mental health is like it's all of it. It's all under the umbrella. It's just there's this line where we cross a threshold of like, okay, like this is clinical depression with like risk, as opposed to like I'm just really down and really struggling because I transitioned to college and I don't have friends and I miss my home. That might not be clinical depression, but it's still under the umbrella of mental health. So like I don't think of them differently in terms of like I know I'm being semantic here, like mental health and mental fitness, but I do think of them as like we can do a lot of like preventative based things. We can do a lot of strength based things. We can do a lot of like I can implement, like kind of what you were just talking about of like having systems in place. Like I can implement self-care systems and I can implement support systems that I know that like I'm building these. So I know like if I'm ever to struggle, I have systems to lean into, as opposed to like more of like a medical approach of like, I'm good until I'm not, then I got to try to build these things out. So kind of a down the middle answer.
No, I actually totally love that answer. And it's kind of reframing the way that I'm thinking about it. And I'm hoping that the people that are listening are also thinking that too. Because my next question was going to be kind of a wink, tongue in cheek, total layup question for you, which is, does everybody need to see a sports psych or a mental fitness individual or even a counselor? But you kind of already answered that question, which is like, no and yes. It's both. Like if you,
Yeah.
I think that we could all get better. And I love what you said about strengths based approach. I think I meet with or have met with coaches, athletes that are saying, I'm fine. I don't need anyone. And I think that is, well, I'm not going to say whether that's right or wrong. That's fine. Whatever your thought is your thoughts. That's fine. And I think that you don't need to, but I would say, do you need to go to the gym to get stronger? Probably. And so or probably not also. You probably just go for a run. Or maybe I'm fine. Maybe I don't need to lift any weights. Right. And you could make that argument. But I think it's the same thing with mental fitness, mental health, or just seeing someone. I guess where do you fall within that?
I think of it a lot of like, technically something you just said was like going to be my answer to this. But I often think of it a lot of like, does it serve you? And if it does, like, do it. Like if having that, like I've done both, like I still do sports psych work, but a lot of my work right now is like counseling psychology with athletes or just people in the community or veterans. And like I have clients that I've worked with that like if I was giving a diagnosis, be like, you don't really need to be here, but they found value and it helped them. So like, yeah, keep coming back. And then I've also worked with people where it's like, no, you need to be here. You need to be coming in here on a weekly basis, right? So I think of it a lot of like, does it serve you? And like that doesn't mean I still kind of have the goal. And I would say a lot of counseling centers work this way just because like it's a lot of need and not a lot of providers of like giving you the skills to do it on your own. So kind of your point of like, do you need to go to the gym to get stronger? Like I think of it like a step further of like, do you need a personal trainer? And for some people, yeah, like to get started because you need to learn how to lift. Like if you took me in the gym and tried to get me to do like Olympic style lifting, I'm going to hurt myself. I don't know what I'm doing. Right. But if you just took me in the gym and was like, can you be fit? Well, can I run? Can I use dumbbells? Do I know how to bench press? Do I know how to squat? Yeah, I can do all those things. That serves me. Cool. Do I want it to be more? Yeah, let me go talk to this dude. I think of like mental health, mental performance, the same of like, you have a lot of these skills. If it's serving you and you don't need to come see me right now, cool. Keep doing what you're doing. Right. But if you're feeling like you need more support, or if you're feeling like you want to add to what you got, yeah, go talk to somebody. So, but then I think the other piece of that is like, what's the function of your behavior? Are you saying you don't need me because you have skills and routines and a solid thing in place? Sure. Rock with what you got. Are you saying you don't need me because you're worried about the perception of other people if you're seen talking to me? Because that's a same action. We're not talking to Joe. Different function. Right? One is I'm good. The other is I'm avoiding the anxiety and the stress and the opinions of others. And I think that's where you can play around with, should you go talk to somebody? And a lot of stigma that we're doing a great job working on, but that's where a lot of stigma falls. So people want to come. They're just afraid of what other people are going to think.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that. It's what you said was the function of your behavior, and I like that because whether you and or other people judging you also, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that I've always been pro mental health, obviously, but also just seeing someone. And I think that the stigma of like mental health is something is wrong with me, or I want to fix something. If you want to fix something, that's different than something is wrong with me. And I think
Love
this like
that.
labels go a long way.
Yeah.
And some counselors, not counselors, clinicians within psychology, personally, this is my opinion, sometimes over label and diagnose. And I think that that could be difficult. And then again, that's my opinion. It's not yours. And I'm not trying to
Yeah.
push my opinion on others or get you to agree with me whatsoever. But I think that that could be where it's, again, that stigma lies is I'm going to go see this person. They're going to tell me what's wrong with me. And they're going to, I'm going to be more fearful leaving than when I walked in.
Yeah. And I would add to that, right? And this is for anyone who's listening, who's maybe like, man, like I've toyed with this idea of going to talk to like a counselor or something like that, right? Like I would say, or a sports psychologist, not like a mental performance coach who can't diagnose anyways, but like a sports psychologist. Like I would say, like I love what you said about labels. And if you're a college person, check in with your counseling center because by and large they don't diagnose, right? They just don't have to because they're not working with insurance, so they don't have to diagnose. That's not all college counseling centers, but like here at Springfield and at Providence, we didn't work with insurance. It was free to all students to go to the counseling center.
I love
So
that.
there was never a diagnosis. In fact, if you wanted one, I would just tell you, like, we don't do that, right? To avoid this idea of like, oh, what does it mean if I'm depressed or I have depression, right? Two different things. I'm depressed versus I have depression. I would also say I like not I wouldn't say everyone, but the clinicians I've been privileged to work with, and alongside and be trained by, like diagnoses aren't given lightly. In fact, a lot of us don't like doing it. But it's the
Wow.
system where there has to be a diagnosis to get insurance to pay for it. Without one, you don't get to use the service unless you're paying out of pocket. You'll see private clinicians now go to a lot of like out of pocket work to avoid insurance altogether, which I know puts the burden on the consumer, but I don't have to diagnose you now. We get away from labels again.
Mm.
And with that, I know I'm on a rant here. Like diagnoses change. So let's say you were working with me and I diagnose you with, generalized anxiety. In 6 months, that could be gone. It's like, yeah, these symptoms, he does not meet criteria, gone. He no longer has a diagnosis. So just for anybody out there, if like the label is the thing, totally hear you. Totally get it. I wouldn't want to be labeled in any way. But there are ways to work around that. And a lot of systems, especially college, try to avoid doing that.
I think that's massively refreshing to hear personally, is that the field is moving forward in a way in which we know that a lot of these labels can be extremely counterproductive, especially for an individual with generalized anxiety. Like if you diagnose, like, sorry, I'm laughing. It's not funny, but like diagnosing somebody who's also has anxiety is like one of the things that like you think like that's going to exacerbate their anxiety. Yeah. And is that going to take a step forward into like helping them get better? They may fixate on it, ruminate on it, catastrophize on it. All of these things can be that. And to your point, these labels of I have depression, you may latch onto it as a mechanism to either get yourself in, out of work. I'm not trying to demean anyone who's struggling with depression. I know this is an extremely difficult thing for you to do and deal with. And employers, it's even more difficult to understand, do I get this person a day off? Do I give them a mental leave of absence? Do I still provide, and it's a struggle, definitely. But I think that to walk around with that label for a long time or forever is something that some people do. Again, not judging, but from what you're saying is absolute breath of fresh air is saying that like, hey, in 8 months, you may not reach that criteria to have whatever it is. Generalized anxiety disorder is a really good example of it. And now you no longer have it,
Yeah.
voila. And I think that malleable piece is this is not a part of my personality. It's not who I am. It's what is happening or occurring to me. It's kind of like, and this is probably not a good example, but like you had cancer and now you don't have cancer anymore. And it's not as bad as cancer, or it
Yeah.
could be. I don't know. But again, I think that's a really refreshing way to think about it.
Yeah. I always try to use the language of like experiencing. Like I'm experiencing anxiety versus like I have. Now, like would your diagnosis have generalized anxiety? Like, yeah, that's what's gonna say on the paper. But like I always think of it as like I'm having this experience. And I think that's where, again, like just speaking to anybody in the audience who's toyed with this idea is like that's where like as clinicians, like it's on us to tell you, like, hey, like this is, for example, like I worked with an athlete who um, thought it was anxiety for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then the more I was hearing, I was like, it sounds like OCD. Like I'm hearing patterns. So we did an assessment, and it was a sat there, went through the assessment, and then like after the assessment, like the score of the assessment plus all of like what I was seeing and what they were telling me was like, yeah, this is moderate OCD. Like it's not that I want to give you this. Like this is what I'm seeing, and but like it's not just a here's what you got. See you next week. Like there's a good clinician's going to talk to you about like what is it like? What was it like for you to go through this survey with me, and like what's coming up for you? What is it like to hear like OCD, like to hear me say that to you? And I diagnosed last year at Providence, I think 2 or 3 athletes that I was like, if we were diagnosing that, we didn't actually diagnose, but like if I was, I'd be like, I think this is OCD. Uh, one or two of them actually. One of them was like, it was like stressful. The other one was like, this is great. Like I have an answer. Like I know what I'm experiencing now isn't just me. Like it's the way my brain works, and now we can work towards something. Right. So to me, like I think about like the diagnosis, like the label sucks, but like really it's the first step in like moving towards like whatever the treatment. And then like to like circle back, like that's like sports like too, right? Like you have competition anxiety or you experience competition anxiety. Like now what do we do to work towards that? Like you have a fixed mindset. What do we do to promote more growth mindset? You lack confidence. What do we do to promote more? Like it sucks to hear it, but it is the first step, the first hurdle in the 110-meter hurdles to get to that end line, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's the first step is to acknowledge whatever you're working towards, even though it could be painful, right? Like to say that, hey, I don't have confidence, and I quote need to go see someone, or I'm just going to seek help, assistance, a personal trainer. I think that's a really interesting example. So this person had OCD, and there were two interesting reactions, right? There was a behavior that this individual was concerned. Again, not judging these, but there's a, hey, I'm really concerned about this. And the second one was, awesome. I'm actually feeling somewhat alleviated. Now what? And I think those are two different reactions to what they were dealing with. I guess, how did this? I have questions without obviously naming the person, but like, what was the OCD to the extent to which you could talk about it, and then also, how is it showing up for them in a sports context, if it was?
The first question, I don't. A lot of, I think for both of them, a lot of like checking behaviors. They looked like anxiety. Like I'm constantly checking this. I'm checking locks. I'm checking my phone. Like a lot of checking based behaviors. Um, and then again, it was like playing with like the function of it. Of like, are you checking? Like, yeah, I remember my first supervisor at Springfield, but he explained this to me of like the obsession is like whether it's safety or whatever it is, like the compulsion alleviates the anxiety. That's why you do it,
Mm.
and then it comes back. Um, so it wasn't, and it doesn't look like what you see on like House or like Scrubs. Like that's not. No, I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but it's not always presents like that. Um, in sport, it presented like a lot of anxiety.
Mm.
So for the longest time, I thought it was just like this person is experiencing just very significant performance anxiety. And then the more we talked about it, it was just like rumination the night before, like constantly, I'll check my bag multiple times before I leave. Like I'll constantly look at the clock on a game day. I'll be in the gym super early because I'm afraid to be late. Like it was like a lot of behaviors that on their face were like, this is anxiety. Like this is just a lot of anxiety, and if we reduce the anxiety, like these behaviors will subside. Um, but then like the more the more we talked, the more I started to see like the patterns of like,
Mm.
oh, like these are the same type of thoughts and the same type of worries and the same types of behaviors manifested in a lot of different environments. And like that kind of cued me to start asking about like, oh, like what's school like? Like
Mm.
what's homework like? And what's home like? And what is it like socially when you're hanging out with friends and you start to see like, oh, this isn't just in a sport context. Like they experience this everywhere. Now it's something different. That again, it could have been generalized anxiety. For these people, it happened to be um, more like the OCD realm. But
No, that's a really interesting thing to think about because as a coach or as a bystander who's looking at that, the person's like if I was their roommate, they're checking their bag all the time, they're showing up to practice early, they're doing all the right things that you would see as like an obsessed athlete. Um, However, what's going on internally is I'm doing this because of this, right? And I think that
yeah,
that is like that because again, if I was a coach, I'm like, oh, this person's crossing their T's, dotting their I's. I'd rather have that person to recruit them than some lazy ass, right, like freshman or junior who doesn't do any of that, forgets his cleats, is late to practice, doesn't show up, all these things, right? And you're thinking that from the standpoint of like of a coach, right, and just having that. But it's really interesting to think about that from the standpoint of seeing you, and then also what's going on up here that is the why behind the behavior.
yeah. And so we're always thinking like, what's the function of this? Like why? Like what does this serve? And to your point, like all of those behaviors, like to a coach and like other players might look like just pure obsession and dedication. Like to that person, it might look like I'm just super anxious and that's what's making me do these things. And like you pull another layer off and it's like there's more here. And I think like my experience over the last couple of years has taught me, and this is not let me actually say this first. Like even though like someone like this is where we want to be careful with labels, like okay, like you experience OCD, like cool, like if it's not distressing to you, it's just your experience. Like you don't have to change anything. Like until like there's plenty of athletes that probably don't seek mental health support or take meds and like they're good. Like they have this experience, but they're good. They don't need support. Like they can still function. They're good with it. It's just the point where like now it's inhibiting functioning and now it's leading to distress. And like that's where we maybe want to get more help. But like what I was going to say is like I'm noticing in a lot of my like training and experiences now where like, and this is not for everybody, but a lot of the things that to me looked like, oh, like low confidence or high anxiety or like lack of concentration, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes there's this like underlying mental health concern or a mental health experience. I don't even want to say concern, a mental health experience that's driving that. And that's why I'm
Mm.
so happy to be like back in school because I can cover the whole bandwidth now to pull back the layers because I had another athlete like in the last couple of years, like same similar presentation, and it was literally just anxiety, just nervous, freshman, wanting to perform well, pressure from home, like just anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. But then like another athlete where it was like OCD. So like sometimes there's this underlying mental health concern and we're trying to slap, just breathe and you'll be fine. And it's like I think we'll cut it. Like
Yeah.
so
I love that. I think it's good for like a lot of athletes and coaches to hear as well is to breath work is such a big thing. Just think more positively is all another big thing, right? That or and then I'm talking about like pop psych or things that you might see on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is. Do some breathing. And while all that is fine, it's kind of like I don't know, doing a squat when your ACL is torn. Like you could probably do it. It's not going to feel good. And it's also not going to fix the underlying problem. Yeah, maybe you'll quote gain strength, but your ACL is torn. You need surgery. And I think that like that is a really interesting thing to say where it's, hey, I lack confidence. Well, let me go see a sports psych. Well, hey, it might be something else, right? There may be something else here that's like a layer deeper.
yeah.
And mindfulness is actually one of those things that I was looking at a study talking about how mindfulness may not be a good skill to teach someone that suffers from certain mental health concerns. And I think one of those is general anxiety. Again, I don't want to put any labels on what those are. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it is, again, one of those things where we can do a disservice as a practitioner or a person who's not steeped in this sort of work, or go seeing and I'm trying to demean any field, but like a life coach, right, for parents or coaches that are out there. Oh, X, Y, and Z person's popular, has so many Instagram followers, blah, blah, blah. Well, they're still not actually treating the underlying cause, right,
Yeah.
as you're saying. And I think that that's why it's highly important to go get your schooling, education, PsyD, if that's a thing for you. CMPC is a really big thing right now within ASP that I think is actually a pretty good thing to do. There's a lot of
Yeah.
people out there that are selling snake oil, so to speak, without actually getting that proper training.
Yeah. And I think for people like consumers, like knowing who to look for, right? Because like for example, like CMPC is I think is a great metric. Like I'm not CMPC by choice, but like trained to do this work, right? So like knowing who, like what is the background of the people you're going to go talk to, simply for like not that they're not good or not motivating or not cool to talk to, right? But like that I always think like ethically like not doing harm. And like
Mm.
sometimes we may do harm because we're not trained to see certain things or we don't know how to refer appropriately or I think your example of that study that said like mindfulness may not be good for certain like clinical presentations, like 100% spot on. Like one of those is trauma that it might not be good for because it's a lot of like feel your body and like that is triggering for people who've experienced trauma. So like, yeah, like there's definitely those pieces and that's why like education and training matters. So like, you know, that going into it. And I remember when I was working with the military, I worked with a soldier who I forget what she was working on, but I was like, yeah, and we'll do imagery. And she was like, nope. I was like, what? And she was like, I'm not doing imagery. And I was like, okay, like what's going on? And she was like, I was a gymnast when I was younger and they always tried to make me do imagery. And I always imagined myself failing and like performing poorly. And I performed poorly and I never want to do that again. And it was like, fair. Like, good for me to like understand that connection for you so we can go a different route versus just, hey, we're going to do this because I think it works. So that's not
Yeah.
not imagery. It works, just not for her. So,
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too of like these authoritative sports psychologists, like these mental coaches that take the coaching a little too seriously. Where it's like, yeah, you're gonna do imagery. I don't care if you had a bad experience. All the research says that we need to do imagery, and it's no, it doesn't work like that
yeah,
at all.
I think it's funny you say that. Like, I think about like I, as a assistant professor at Springfield, like I train like like us like graduate level mental performance coaches and training, and that's something we often talk about is not always needing to have an answer or to fix something or to provide a skill and learning to like sit with people. And this is like I learned this from going like the clinical route. Now I'm kind of weaving them together, but like trying to like work with them on like, man, like I forget, it was my supervisor at Springfield when I was doing clinical work, but also he has a sports like background. And he was like, man, he's like, how arrogant is it for me to think that you could walk in and within 30 minutes, I have all the answers to all your problems versus like, you have the answers and we can work
Yeah.
collaboratively to get there. And like, to your point of like, that involves like this process versus me just talking at you. Like I'm talking with you, not at you. And I'm helping you solve your own problems. And that might mean we use self-talk or we use some imagery, but like not just because I told you to go do it, but like we came to this collaboratively.
Together, right? Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's where it's vastly different than, well, I mean, even in personal training, you would get like an assessment, and then you would go from there, set a goal, and then create a plan, etc. And it's very similar with counseling and sports psych, but it's also different. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh yeah, you're presenting trauma from your childhood and based on the interaction that you had with your dad, that one time in which you kind of explained to me, blah, 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 then that leads to your lack of confidence. Here's what you do on the court: some self-talk, some imagery, go forth, do good things, come back to my office if you need anything. Like, no, it's not like that. Like, we got to sit down, we got to understand each other, but also you have the answers. I don't, right? I know all the theory, I know some of the skills that could work for you, but this is really your puzzle to kind of unlock. And I think that that was a big unlock for me, kind of going
Yeah.
through understanding what it meant to be a sports like, to be a performance individual who is a mental, is in mental fitness. It's a lot of client led facilitation.
Yeah. I think sometimes I wish I was in like, and this is not to mean like strength coaches or like athletic trainers, but like sometimes I'm like, man, like it'd be cool if I knew like this is like what the ACL does and this is how it works. And like when it like tears or ruptures, like this is the process we go to next. Like there's I don't want to say simplicity, but like there's steps. And
Yeah.
like psychology just does not work that way.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it falls neatly in line, but more often than not, it's just a complex soup of emotions and thoughts and opinions and beliefs and feelings and just all and experiences and all these things that you're trying to work through
And then perform at your best.
consistently.
Consistently, right? Throw that on top of there.
Yeah. Like I can have that one off, but
Yeah.
it's like playing golf. Like, yeah, I hit one good drive out of 18 or 15 or whatever. And like, that's not good. So we want to be consistent.
Yeah. Um, Dude, this was awesome. We're coming up on the lightning round, so I want to ask you 4 questions. Is that cool?
Yeah.
All right. So the first one is it's somewhat of a complex one. We already kind of talked about this a little bit, but what are 3 mental skills that you think are most important that you've either seen in yourself or other athletes? And I know that we talk about so many skills, so many theories, so many like just different modes, and you can just answer this question however you want to answer it. But I guess to get to that point where an athlete is, I don't know, quote, in a flow state. We talked a little bit about that and how you don't necessarily coach towards that, but we talked about mental wellness, mental fitness, all these good things. What are 3 mental skills that you think are the most important that you've seen in a lot of high performers?
I have an answer, and I might like if you ask me tomorrow, I might change my mind. So I'm just going to practice that.
That's smart.
I think one of them, and I want to be mindful of like using like cliche terms, but like so I'll actually try to like briefly explain what I mean by each of them. So like one being like a growth mindset, and I think growth mindset has just been watered down to the extreme. But like I think about it from the idea of having like the belief that my skills and abilities can change. Like I think that's a number one prerequisite. And what comes with that is like an openness to seeking out challenges, an openness to failure. Not that I like it, but like I know that it comes with the recipe. Like an openness to feedback and criticism. Like those are all things that help us grow, as opposed to the flip side of those being like, I don't think I can get any better. So like I think one, like that's a hallmark of like every top athlete I've worked with had a genuine belief that like they can grow and change, and they were open to those processes to do it. So I'd say that's one. I think two, like I know we talked about it earlier, but like I'm such like an attention person. Like if I can, and that does not mean your attention never shifts. Like it's not tunnel vision, right? But like, can I keep the main thing the main thing? Can I focus on task relevant cues? And can I recognize when my attention shifts and have the skill to bring it back? And that's where like mindfulness comes in, of noticing and being able to redirect, right? So like I think to me, like that's another one that I really lead into. And then this is hard. I would capture like more just like I lead into like more of like the acceptance, like commitment way of approaching like our cognition, like our thoughts of like, do I have the ability to like notice when I'm having distressing or difficult or like negative thoughts? Like, can I notice that and then be able to kind of like create space? Similar, like if you wrote it down and then looked at it and be like, oh, like those are just words. But like, can I create space and then choose my behavior based on my values? Like, I think that is just another like, when I look at like some of the athletes I've been around that are like really, really good, like on or off the court, able to like have difficult thoughts, like I perform well, I'm down on myself, and then be able to create space and then like choose what they're going to do next based on their values and beliefs, as opposed to based on like the negative or distressful thoughts that they're having. And I think within that recipe is like I can learn and grow, and I'm open to change. when I'm having difficult experiences, I know that I can like create space and work through those, not avoid them, but like work through those. And then when it's time to perform, I can direct my attention to the things that matter most and just play. Like to me, it's not everything, but like to me, to me, it's a good foundation. If you can do those things and you have the skill to go with it, you're set up to perform well consistently.
That was awesome. I'm gonna create a course on that coming up pretty soon. I'm like dead serious. I think that the way in which you broke that down made so much sense to me, and I hope the people that are listening. So recap, you said not in this order. Well, actually, let's go in order. Growth mindset, even though it's a cliche term, just being open, and you said that multiple times. Openness, and it almost sounds like a personality type. Like if you took like the I don't know personality assessment, openness is in there to experiences, to failure, openness to this thought or idea that I could grow, learn that my failures aren't me, and that's kind of that acceptance and commitment piece. That act acceptance commitment therapy without the therapy, but whatever. And it's also a nod to Dr. Viktor Frankl's book Man's Search for Meaning, where he says in the book something along the lines of like between the action and the response there is a gap, and the wider that we can create that gap in there is how you can be who you truly are and respond within your values and within your beliefs and how you want to show up. And I think that that is just amazing. I think of all the times in which, and mom, if you're listening to this, I apologize in advance. My mom would just snap at me for something that I would do. And I'm like, mom, like just, you didn't have to. And then she would apologize afterwards. Right. And then think about this. If you're a parent, Joe, and you're a parent, all the times in which maybe we don't get enough sleep, we're showing up as our authentic self. We're stressed, we're tired, we're hungry, whatever it is. And then something happens and you just flip. There is an acceptance and commitment of what's going on, obviously, not judging yourself. I think that we do that all the time. I should not be crying or moved to tears, or I should not be sad. I should not be frustrated. I get this all the time. I'll sit on the couch and watch Netflix. I should not be lazy. I should be working. A lot of these like should things that are going on. And I think that if we could be mindful of it, accept it for what it is, and then say, am I showing up for myself in the best way that I can in this moment? That just creates so much space for us to move. So I love the way that you broke that down. So those three, again, growth mindset, mindfulness, and act.
Okay. Yeah. I love the piece you just said about like I often think instead of like not being judgmental, and this is just me personally of like, I know I'm going to experience thoughts of judgment. Like it just comes with the recipe of being human. I also think of like being really intentional, giving myself grace. And that's not grace. Like, I don't mean that like spiritually, like, or religiously. Like I mean of like giving myself like like we always say, like we're our hardest critics and like we have the most unrealistic standards for ourselves. Right. So like I often think about things that way of like give myself grace to like watch TV, give myself grace to make a mistake, give myself grace to you know, I didn't get enough sleep and I snapped when my kid did something. Like that comes with it. That's life. I don't have to then beat myself up on top of it. Like it's part of existence. And that to me is like a piece of that acceptance of like hard things happen. That's life, right? Can I notice it, accept it, and then choose what I'm going to do next?
Absolutely.
So grace is a big thing in my personal life.
Yeah, I think it, and just to put like what you're talking about and completely understand is self-compassion. Yeah. And that was one of the hardest things for me to learn as a high performer. And you could even kind of look at individuals that have performed at their best and their highest. Yeah. I would love to do a study on this. I think that they are probably pretty low in self-compassion, like Tiger Woods, like Michael Jordan, like David Goggins. But then again, at the same time, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they actually do have a lot of compassion for themselves. I don't know. I think that'd be an interesting thing to think about.
I wonder sometimes, like, if we confuse when someone's having like high self-compassion, like that does not mean they don't care. And we conflate those sometimes of like, you'll hear people I mean, I think I just saw it like the other day, whether it was a playoff game or an NFL game or an NBA game, but like they were like on somebody for like smiling and like even though the team lost, and it was like he's not smiling that they lost, like. But like I often like we have these ideas of like how people should respond to like setbacks or failure or bad things, and like that does not jive with this idea of experiencing self compassion. And to me, like those
Yeah.
things are mutually exclusive. Like I can experience self compassion and give myself grace that I played bad today. That does not mean I don't care that I played bad. That does not
Right.
mean that I'm not going to work hard. Like, but like we don't see it that way. It's like if I give myself grace, then I must not care.
And
And like that's, I think that's a super harmful mindset of like those you can be high in both. And
yeah.
I honestly think a lot of top performers are high in both. Like I think they can give themselves grace that like it comes with it. Like I'm gonna have down. Like I think Steph taught like you're gonna have bad games. That's the self compassion piece. And then there's the like I care. I'm gonna work hard. Like I'm in the gym after the game shooting. Like that's the so like you can do both. And I think it would be really helpful, especially for young athletes, to like know that. Like you don't have to beat yourself up just because you played bad.
Yeah. It actually, now that you're mentioning it, I'm thinking maybe I am wrong. Maybe like thinking that David Goggins or, these people don't have any self compassion. They probably do have a lot because the knowing that I can do something else and go from here and I may have failed now, but now I'm going to get it back up and go forth. Like it doesn't mean again that I don't care. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's not, I agree with you. That's not the point. It's to give myself grace, compassion, and I still care. And what's next? I'm going to go do this thing.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah.
love that.
We both.
Yeah. All right. We're still in the lightning round. Maybe the hardest question of the day.
Like,
What's your favorite food?
favorite food. Oh, uh, I love like I always say seafood, and my wife's like, that's not a food. That is a whole like. But like I love like a good like salmon.
Nice.
Like I know like I would normally say steak, but like salmon is something I don't eat a lot of it, but like I love salmon.
I love that. No, Tim is freaking amazing. Yeah. When you're frustrated, what do you do?
What do I do? What should I do?
Good one.
I I think for me, like it's context dependent. For me, I try to like find a way to create space,
Mm.
and whether that's like just taking a couple moments and breathe, whether that's like go on a walk, whether that's lean into something that I'm passionate about, like maybe like I go swing the golf club or go shoot baskets or go on a jog, or I don't do this as much anymore, but like play a video game, take my dog for a walk. Like for me, like the I try to create space.
Mm.
So I'm not acting out of the frustration. Like that's like I'm not getting hooked on that emotion and those thoughts when I'm able to create some space and then I can within that like choose what I do next.
It's good to know that you as a counselor are also human.
Right? Like, we talk about that as counselors all the time. Like, hey, like we just a dude, like a regular dude. We just trained in a different way.
Yeah. I absolutely love that because you're right. I think creating space for, and it's difficult too. I think like there's like the biology of emotion will say that there are certain parts of your brain that kind of shut down, especially in frustrating situations where you're really angry or whatever it is. And so it's really difficult, but through training, through saying, hey, I'm noticing that I am frustrated now. Now go take the dog for a walk.
Yeah.
Go to swing the golf club. I mean, that might make me more frustrated. I can't lie. Or do something that's I may not hit the ball. I may hit the ball. Just being outside is good enough for me, right? I love that. Last question. I'm a big routine person. I know that we talk about routines. Pop culture talks about routines and stuff like that. And sometimes they're not as important as you think, and sometimes they are. But what's an underestimated part, would you say, of your routine currently?
Wait, say that end of that again. An underestimated part of what?
Yeah, underestimated part. So, like, I don't know, something that maybe we wouldn't expect, something that's nuanced, or it could just be like something that you feel personally. Hey, this small thing actually gives me a lot of benefit in my routine.
About routines?
No, about your routine.
Oh, okay. Um, like any routine, like a
Yeah.
morning routine.
Yeah, it could be morning, night. It could be something that you do before you write a paper. I don't know.
An underestimated part of
Yeah.
like what it does for me.
Is it?
Um,
It's an interesting question. Yeah.
I don't know if I would say this is underestimated. So maybe I'm like misunderstanding the question. Um, to me, like I think of it similar to like we talked about a while ago of like working yourself into like the game. Like I think of routines a lot that way. So like the one routine that I am wildly strict on, not wildly strict, it's just like I can't shift it even if I wanted to, is like my morning routine. And to me, like it sets up the rest of the day. Like if my kiddo disrupts it, like it's a noticeable like I'm uncomfortable now. So to me, like I really lean into like my morning routine. It's like that kicks off my day, and I'm gonna make sure I have some coffee, and I'm gonna enjoy. Like I don't get up with like the gotta get up and get rolling. Like the grind doesn't stop. Like yes, it does. um, like I like to enjoy my morning. So like I like to like wake up and have a cup of coffee and watch like Sports Center or something, and like actually like enjoy my morning. So that might mean I get up 2 hours before I have to leave, which sucks, but it gives me like, to me, like that routine sets me up for the rest of the day. So yeah, I don't know if it's underrated, but
I do. Yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying. So you're saying that the morning, and this is really funny and also somewhat counterintuitive because I know a lot of people that work from home will like roll out of bed and take their first call. That's also not me. I'm not that type of person. So it's really good self awareness for you to say,
yeah,
one, I'm not that person. And two, I need this extra time doing these things, you know, drinking a cup of
yeah,
coffee, watching your morning shows, whatever that is, undisturbed, and then going from there.
yeah. And the weird thing is like it's not like I can't do like I've had plenty of like, oh crap, my alarm didn't go off, like I have to rush.
Sure.
I just like I know the difference in me as a person. Like when I sit down with my first athlete or I sit down with a student, like I'm rushed. I have more anxiety. Like I feel pressed. I feel unorganized. Like I don't like that. Versus like
Yeah.
a morning that I work myself into the day.
I love that.
So
It's a yeah, I absolutely love that. For me, it's my meditation walk. I walk every morning, or try to, and it's one of those things that's like I can't. It's non-negotiable. I gotta go
yeah,
outside. I gotta just like relax. It could be raining. It could be snowing. I know it's not gonna snow where I am, but like I need it. That's my outlet. That's one of
yeah.
the things I thrive off of.
I
Well,
think
Joe,
for
this has been
people
awesome,
like
man.
doing that.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was great. Sorry, I just rambled a lot, but I just need to get it out. You know what I mean? So,
That's what a podcast is for me to
yeah,
talk, for you to talk, for us to, have a conversation. No, look, this has been great. It's been highly like enlightening, especially for myself and anybody listening, just to understand mindfulness better, acceptance and commitment therapy, knowing how you yourself can actually like seek out, but also talk to an individual who is in counseling, who is Joe, which was absolutely amazing, I think, for a lot of people listening. And look, if you need that extra help, or just a helping ear or person to listen to, go seek out, I think, counselors that are either on campus for you, or in a network or some providers or something of that nature, to really just understand and get that help that you need. Because I feel extremely passionately about this. The numbers of anxiety and depression are on the rise. I think that athletes in particular, we have a really strong voice. And individuals look up to LeBron James that had never played basketball in their lives,
mhm,
just as an individual to admire, to look up to. And I think that within this achievement orientation, within this individuals that are high performing individuals, you would see counseling or therapy as counterintuitive. But to dismantle that and to say that they actually go hand in hand, I think is extremely powerful. So I
yeah.
just want to say thank you, Joe, for doing the work that you do. I think it's absolutely awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, man. And with that, we will see you on our next episode. Dave Matthews out, Joe Kennedy out. You can find him on LinkedIn. We'll leave a little bio and description in the show notes so y'all can click on that and get all the good information. And if you're interested, reach out to Joe Kennedy, apply to Springfield College. They have a really good program. And yeah, no, it's not just a plug for Joe. All right, Joe, thanks for coming.
Thank you.